A line we see, or a variation of line we see all too often after a mass shooting, is FBI was warned, or local PD was warned, or there were warning signs that were ignored. This begs the question, why is this a consistent theme? Recent history, 2022, we had the shooting at the Colorado LGBT nightclub that ended up killing 5 and wounding 17 others. The shooter was only stopped after being wrestled to the ground by club patrons. The kicker here is that the shooter had been on the FBI's radar almost a year and a half prior for threatening his grandparents and building a bomb in their basement. The FBI ended up closing the case just a month later, as the individual was facing state felony charges for the aforementioned bomb threat and murder threat, which were later dropped. Because of this lack of follow through, the person was able to walk free and commit the shooting a little over a year later. The FBI and local law enforcement, for that matter, were not only aware of this person and his homicidal and terroristic inclinations, they had him arrested pending the trial, which never happened for unknown reasons, courtesy of Colorado's odd handling of cases involving dropped charges. So they had this guy in their hands, but between that handling of drop charge cases and our own broken federal systems, we let him go on to kill 5 people and maim a dozen and a half more. I wish this was the only example of this, but we see it all too often. Even more recently, we had that string of shootings in Maine where the Army reservist got the rifle from the armory, ended up stealing it, shot up the bowling alley, and then it was that 2-day manhunt that had kind of the whole Northeast on eggshells for a hot minute. That was preceded by tips to the police from the guy's unit and also people that knew him about threats to do exactly that had been made by that soldier. Their response, they ramped up patrols in the area. They ended up staking out his home for 2 weeks, at which point they went, oh, he hasn't shown up. Oh, well, and they stopped. There's probably more information to this, but as of yesterday, when I was looking into this just to see if there was an update, that's all we have. They tried for 2 weeks and then they gave up. Those tips, by the way, were not passed on to the FBI, so they're more or less off the hook on this one. They can't do their jobs if they're not given the information to do them. And at the NICS system, just for this argument, the NICS system that does the background checks goes off the FBI's information. So if they don't have that information, it won't throw a flag and stop a person from purchasing a firearm. Even more recently, we had that shooting at the Houston megachurch last month. The shooter's ex-mother-in-law had been trying for years to alert authorities, state, federal, local, etc., to the shooter's mental health problems, but there was no follow-up from those agencies, and it went completely unaddressed and ended the way that it did. If your business, or the one you work for, could be forced to be shut down for a single clerical error, first one you've made maybe, something as simple as the wrong number in the wrong place, put 2018 instead of 2019 on a document, or you file a paper incorrectly. Would you be safe? Would you and your business be safe? This situation is where federal firearms licensees across the country are now finding themselves, their very livelihoods in danger, courtesy of a government agency that has been given the authority to jump straight to revocation of their legally required licenses for their business. An ATF order that was issued in 2022 redefined the circumstances in which they could revoke a business's federal firearms license, which I'm going to call FFL, just save myself some syllables. They instituted this no tolerance policy where a single violation, if it was deemed serious enough, could be used as reasoning for the revocation of said license. How do they determine if a violation is worthy of revocation? It's quite simple. One way would be if the licensee has a history of violations. This is not applicable to the situation just described because it's the first time violation, so I'll just kind of leave that one where it is. Another would be statements or admissions from the licensee or the licensee's employees that would indicate willful violation of these regulations. If you own up to it, that could get you. You own up to your mistake, they can use that as a reason to take away your license. That doesn't sit well with me. Seems counterintuitive, I would say. It's like it encourages you to not report if you make a mistake. Do your very best to cover it up rather than own up to it and then fix the problem. That's very contradictory to how I view handling problems. They can also get you if you have substantial experience running an FFL, if you've been doing it for a very, very long time, and then you make a mistake. They go, you should know better, and they'll yoink it. Finally, the ATF can use inspection reports. For those who don't know, the ATF is supposed to come in and do inspections of an FFL on a relatively regular basis, where they'll go through all the paperwork, make sure things are good to go. They can use these inspection reports even if the inspection reports find no violations. If you have multiple inspections done with no problem, and then they find a problem, relatively minor one, they will determine that was willful because you did it right before, so why did you do it wrong this time? And they'll revoke your license. Some of these violations are things like falsifying records, making false statements on records, facilitating straw purchases, transfer to a prohibited person, things that are illegal. But there's the rather concerning line that is in this memo, reads, ATF may revoke for any other willful first-time violation as it deems appropriate. That's the extent of that language. That is a lot of power to be given such subjective general language. What exactly makes it an appropriate or an inappropriate violation? There's too much wiggle room for interpretation there. Something like a particularly vindictive investigator could decide that an otherwise minor violation would be adequate grounds for revoking a license. Are y'all okay with that? 'Cause I'm definitely not. On a better note, Louisiana passed a constitutional carry bill, which allows their law-abiding adults, 18 and older, to legally carry handguns without a license. People worry, it makes the news every time a state passes a law like this, but people worry that these kinds of laws make our communities less safe, often claiming that allowing people to carry without a permit opens the door to gun violence. And I hear these people, but I have a counter argument. When was the last time a law-abiding gun owner shot a place up or murdered someone? Because I would argue that carrying a gun anywhere with the intent of committing a crime, regardless if you're legally carrying up to that point, precludes you from being a law-abiding citizen. Someone wanting to commit a violent crime is going to carry a weapon of whatever kind anywhere they want, regardless of how legal it is for them to do it. Do you think that a gang member is going to go through the process to get a license to carry so they can stay on the right side of the law? Of course not. They'll do what they want because they don't care how legal or illegal it is. They're criminals. They're there to commit crimes. Opening the doors to legal concealed carry to more law-abiding citizens is a good thing. It shifts the balance of good guys with guns and bad guys with guns. Excuse me, can't talk today. It shifts that balance more in favor of the good guys with guns. Speaking of, this is not necessarily new news, but it is circulating now. It's been drawn to wider attention lately that the CDC was asked in 2013 to investigate the number of defensive uses of firearms in the United States. This is in the midst of the increasing spike of mass shootings and prevalence and lethality. It was almost certainly ordered to provide evidence that guns are not often used enough for good purposes to justify their existence in our country. But it ended up finding the opposite. The year that the data was pulled from, 2008, showed 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms. Compare that to the estimate of between 500,000 and 3 million defensive firearm uses in the same year. The variation in that data comes from inconsistent reporting of uses. There are circumstances where if a firearm can be used defensively, but because of the way the laws are written or worded, it ends up going unreported because the victim of the crime, the person being robbed or attacked, could legally be in the wrong, so they're not going to report it at that point. So that's where that variation comes in. But the lower end of that is the known cases, and that's still 200,000 cases higher than the number of violent crimes. And that's another noteworthy point. Why are there circumstances where you can use a firearm defensively in a morally or logically justified manner, but it doesn't check out legally? Why do I have to worry if I draw my gun to protect myself or my family or somebody else? Why do I have to be worried about facing charges? It's ridiculous. That's it. Good evening, y'all. Welcome to Medley's Minute on GCD Network. I'm Stefan Medley. I'm an independent candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in Texas's 10th Congressional District. Sticking to the brief intro format this week. So if you'd like to learn more about me and my campaign, I encourage you to watch my previous shows, which are uploaded to GCD Network's website. Also check out my website. I have a direct link to the aforementioned previous shows, as well as a list of all the stances I've written about so far. Still got plenty of yard signs as well. So if you're in District 10, you want one, hit that contact form with your address and I will hand deliver to you myself. If you're not sure what district you're in, I've also added a link under the More tab on my website to House.gov's tool, which you can use to identify your representative based on your address. I encourage you to use that tool if you are unsure. It's an important thing to know. The primaries in Texas are in 2 days. Yes, 2 days. And as an independent candidate, I need 500 signatures on a petition to actually get on ballot in November from people who did not vote in the primaries. If you didn't vote, you're willing to support my campaign, you're willing to sign that petition, hit that contact form, reach out on social media, and let me know. I will come get that signature from you myself. Happy to do the footwork here. So first, the elephant in the room. This is not the criminal justice continuation talk that I'd said I'd finish at the end of last week's show. I do have every intention of finishing that train of thought next week, but I had the opportunity to help out at a firearms industry event this weekend, and since the topic is fresh on my mind, I've opted to touch on it today. Also, as always, if there's a particular topic you want to hear about, reach out, let me know. If it's broad enough to fill a full show, I'll do it in one show. If it's not, I'll end up doing a Q&A type format where I'll touch on issues that maybe I can address in a paragraph or two or a couple sentences, something I couldn't fill the show with. I'll put them all into one and we'll get them all knocked out at once. And I'll post my take on those on various social medias. The second smaller elephant, I owe you a dad joke at this point. I found a couple of truly painful ones this time, so I ask you bear with me. Sat front row at a comedy club for cannibals. I was roasted for hours. And the tickets cost me an arm and a leg. All right, back to the topic. Guns and gun rights. Let me be blunt from the beginning, just make myself clearly understandable and difficult to misquote. I support the Second Amendment. That is the end of that sentence. There's no, I support the Second Amendment, but it is, I support the Second Amendment. The wording of the Second Amendment is pretty clear. Well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. For those not familiar. The wording is clear and not as open to interpretation as many people seem to argue. I'll try not to spend too long on this. I once wrote a several-page long essay because I got real fired up about it, so I can and will go off for a while if I don't rein myself in, but I will spare you all that today. The right of the people to keep and bear arms means the right belongs to the people, not the militia. It belongs to the people. That well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, is acknowledging the necessity of a militia to be available for a national crisis. The militia, as it's worded there, is the people, but the right is guaranteed to the people independent of being in the militia. That's a whole other set of odd, I hesitate to say semantics, but odd wording that is pertinent to that interpretation. The militia in this context would have been referring to the people because of the Militia Act of 1792, which was passed the year after the Second Amendment was ratified, required every free able-bodied white male citizen between the ages of 18 and 45. That word is a product of its time. I think we can drop the white and male parts to just say it is every able-bodied citizen. With being every able-bodied citizen, the militia is the people, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Easy, right? All right. So there's the recurring issue of the general law enforcement and FBI tips of mass shooters, other terrorists, domestic and otherwise, going improperly committed. This is another clear indicator of a busted criminal justice law enforcement system. It's a particularly difficult issue for me to think about a solution for because I don't know what could be done other than holding some higher level of accountability to departments if they fail to adequately investigate a tip. I hesitate to come down on them too hard and tell them how to do their jobs because I'm not a cop. There's a lot that I don't know about law enforcement. I'll openly admit to that. I hesitate to come down on them and tell them how to do their jobs. And it's certainly not as universal of an issue as some other things. You know, every department's going to be different. So I don't necessarily think there's going to be a widespread, bring the hammer down solution that's going to fix this problem once and for all. That would actually be effective. I think the best case there would just be if we can prove that it was blatant, specific word I'm looking for and I'm blanking on it. We can prove that they should have followed up on that tip and they didn't quite willfully. There should be a higher level of accountability held to them. The FBI policy of closing cases once someone is facing state level charges is a bit absurd. to me. I'm not sure how much truth there is in that specific phrasing, but that's what I consistently found over several articles. So I'm inclined to believe it. You know, otherwise, let me know. Let me know how you know. I will happily correct myself. But given what I've read, that's what I'm inclined to believe. So if that is how it's handled, that needs to change. Someone who's done something or suspected of doing something serious enough to warrant FBI involvement should be properly and legally investigated by the FBI, regardless of any state level charges. Now, we book them at the state level, and then they also get hit with some federal charges. I don't necessarily see a problem with that, especially if you drop the federal charge or you drop the state charges, and now the feds don't care anymore, as what happened with this individual in Colorado. I'm still kind of reeling from having read that. It's just truly ridiculous. It's a wasteful loss of life. I don't agree with it. I don't get along with it. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Good old ATF. We've been in the news quite a bit over the last few years. If you're involved in the gun community at all, you know very well of them. But even if you're not, they have been coming up in mainstream media. They finally had a director, confirmed for the first time since 2015. There's the pistol brace ban, and the 80% receiver bans they're trying to push through their efforts to redefine when someone would need a license to sell a gun. They also, as mentioned earlier, have been coming down harder than ever on license holders, particularly smaller license holders, shutting down businesses for clerical errors as well as genuine violations. In full disclosure, I myself have an FFL SOT business I've been working on trying to gear up. So I've got a bit of internal insight to how things are run and how such have been running and how they probably should be. Especially having talked to others in the industry like I did today, I've done over the last year and change. The IOI investigators, the industry operations investigators, are the ATF agents that actually go door to door, so to speak, to these license holders to make sure they're meeting storage requirements, they're meeting building requirements to get them their federal firearms license. They're also the ones responsible for doing inspections and investigations when you're going in a couple years later, make sure documents are still in order. They have a bit too much leeway under the current wording to determine what is and isn't a license revocable offense. Now, this is not to say that all IOI agents are bad. My local one who did my inspection and helped me through the process, he was great. No complaints. Super chill dude. And this is also applicable to pretty much any category of person or employment. It's generally a substantial stretch to say all XYZ are bad. The problem is the bad ones are the ones we hear about because they make more noise. So the good ones, so to speak, go unnoticed more often. So an overly gung-ho IOI who's trying to make waves in the federal law enforcement community. They're trying to get their career off to a great start by shutting down as many FFLs as possible so that they can get more reports in effectively. They're going to be much more likely to be far more scrutinous, possibly to a fault, than someone who's been there a minute and is just going through their career, And this is not unique to IOIs or any federal agent or not federal agent type for that matter. You do also see this on the FFL side as well, but it's kind of the inverse. Your newer license holders are far more likely to make a mistake, especially clerical ones, than ones who have been up and running for a while. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to them. I've worked for several before, and mistakes happen. We're all human. It is what it is. But newer FFL is much more likely to make smaller, especially clerical mistakes, just given the nature of the paperwork. Much of that paperwork is not exactly simple. The wording is complicated. It's not entirely clear all the time what needs to go in what box and what form and where that form needs to be mailed or emailed. And adequate guides are not as easily found as I really think they should be. Couple this with forms changing very constantly. I think we had 2 updates to the good old 4473 background check form. I think we had 2 updates to that form last year. I know we had at least 1. And the likelihood of a problem with such regular changes to the root paperwork, the probability becomes substantially higher the more changes that are made. I'm having a harder time wording that for some reason, but if you've got a form changing multiple times in a year, something that was fine in January might no longer be fine in August. And if you miss an email or a memo, you use the wrong form here, the wrong form there. That could be something that's license revocable, even if it's as simple as, this last change they made, they added a couple new boxes. Which I had one with me, so I could point to it. A couple new boxes pertinent to this sale of ammunition. I want to say that were not there previously. So now you've got extra categories of people that are prohibited persons from purchasing a firearm. But if you use the wrong form, the wrong one gets mixed in with the wrong stack and filled out and submitted, and then 3 years down the line or next month when they come to do an inspection, then you're screwed. You've got no recourse under the current system if your IOI is really, really scrutinous with how deep they're looking into your documentation. Because of this flexibility, shall we say, that the IOIs have, FFLs are getting revoked at record rates compared to previous years. And it's for things that 10 years ago, they would have batted an eye at. They would have been like, oh, that's messed up, fix it. And that would have more or less been the end of it. The more serious offenses, the things like the straw purchases, selling to someone who you have reasonable suspicion to be a prohibited person, I believe is the exact wording of it. Don't necessarily agree with it, but I get it. That is actually illegal. But a clerical error, a 1 here instead of 2, or the wrong year is the one I keep going back to. Things like that, especially if you are a new license holder, mistakes are going to happen. I'm not necessarily saying they should be let off completely scot-free, but give some leeway, especially when they are a new licensee. You shouldn't, the first time you write March instead of April, or you write 1 as a number instead of writing it ONE. That is an actual thing on those forms in certain boxes. That could be enough. And especially if you're a new FFL, I don't necessarily think it should. There should be a little bit of extra leeway there that is just not currently being afforded to them. The NICS system as well needs some serious work. That's the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Something to that effect. That's, if you go in to buy a gun, that's how they do your background check. And that system's all sorts of screwed up. I can't recall the exact figures off the top of my head, but the number of genuine denials that have happened through NICS is concerningly small. The number of false denials, the number of people who should be able to purchase their gun and are not because of system errors, that number is concerningly high. We've had these fixed NICS bills in the past that have come and gone with no real measurable effect on the number of denials and approvals, fraudulent or correct. The system's screwed up. It's clear that it's just having money dumped into it and it's not being handled properly. Another excellent screwed up example of firearms related systems not working. You got your e-forms systems for your things like suppressors, short-barreled rifles, machine guns, if you happen to be absurdly wealthy. The new system was meant to get you the approval for these items that you are constitutionally entitled to in 90 days. And we are not seeing that. It's getting better, but we are still, the average, I want to say it's still 180 plus days for something that at the end of the day is just a background check that you do at a gun store. You just pay an extra $200 and it takes months to get this item that you've paid for in full. And especially now that it's all digital, there's no reason it should take that long. The NICS system, for all its faults, it's fast most of the time. But even when it's not, it's a few days. So why am I paying $1,000 for a suppressor and then waiting 13 months to get it? A lot of things need to change here. ATF does not, I think, have enough oversight above them to make sure they're doing their jobs properly. It's too many examples of kind of we've investigated ourselves and we have determined that there was no fault. That's not unique to the ATF, but there needs to be more oversight. We need to hold them more accountable to the things that they say they're going to do that they're not. The kind of unofficial registry that they've been doing with retaining 4473s. For those who don't know, when you shut down an FFL, you give the 4473s that you still have on hand. You're supposed to retain them. I want to say it's 15 years. You give the ones that you still have to the ATF, and it's supposed to be they hold on to them for X number of years and then they destroy them. What was discovered is that they were taking these and they were recording them digitally, creating effectively a soft registry of all of the gun owners in the United States, which is the exact opposite of what they were supposed to be doing. They did get hit on that one pretty hard, but to my knowledge, I think they're still doing it. Don't quote me on that necessarily, but I'm pretty sure they're still doing it. And it was just kind of like a slap on the wrist, don't do it again. I went, okay. I have strong opinions about the ATF if you haven't gathered. That said, that is all I've got for today. So, of course, your closing dad joke. My fiance asked me to stop singing Wonderwall to her. I said maybe. Thank you for tuning in to Medley's Minute. I appreciate you spending some of your Sunday evening with me or future day for watching this retroactively. I'll be on again next Sunday, 5:30 Central. See you again then. Once again, be sure to check out my website, stefanmedley.com. Twitter, Instagram, all the fun ones. I'm on there. There's a direct link to those on my website as well. The Facebook in particular, that link is hideous looking. I'm not going to try to read that one to y'all. But follow me there for updates on the campaign. Reach out if you got any questions or comments. Let me know what you want to hear from me in future podcasts. If you've got great insight, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for your time and support. Y'all have a fantastic week. Once again, this has been Medley's Minute on GCD Network. Good night. Y'all be kind. Stay tuned about 3 minutes for Randolph's Corner.